Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our discussion on India's Foreign Contribution Regulation Amendment Act 2020. My name is Michael Green, and while this latest development is not surprising, it is nonetheless concerning for any nonprofit organizations that are either in India or planning to enter into India. I am the Director for Government and Strategic Development based out of Sonomas 4's Washington, D.C. office. I have been following the developments of the nonprofit space for several years at this stage, dating back to my few years that I ran Sonomas 4's operation in India based out of our Mumbai location. Prior to Sonomas 4, I advocated for stronger U.S.-India commercial and strategic ties, particularly in the healthcare and entertainment sectors, while with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's U.S.-India Business Council. And a little bit about Sonomas 4, for those who are not familiar with us. I did check out the list of attendees and did see many people were familiar with, but for those who are not, we provide comprehensive and integrated market entry and expansion services and solutions, including tax, finance, accounting, payroll, and HR consulting. Our approach combines both advisory and implementation support, starting with a genuine understanding of our partners' objectives in the markets they are entering. In India alone, our partners include leading international think tanks and healthcare nonprofit organizations who work with the Indian government and other organizations to promote better healthcare outcomes, particularly for women and children. We also support some of the world's top research universities who are conducting joint research in India, most often with Indian universities. Our team combines in-country expertise, Naomi Kapoor, who I'll introduce here shortly, with a global team of market entry professionals like myself and Ed Dixon, who you will meet here shortly as well, to help organizations navigate the complexities of doing business internationally and internationalizing their organizations. Leading us through today's session, I have, as I mentioned, Naomi Kapoor and Ed Dixon. Naomi is based out of Sonomas 4's New Delhi office and heads our tax and regulatory practice. She works directly with our partners who are grappling with the complexities of doing business in India as nonprofits. Naomi is a chartered accountant with over a decade of experience, including with the Big Four in India. Ed Dixon is our Executive Director UK, based out of our London office. Prior to leading our UK and European-based activity, Ed was our General Manager based out of our Delhi office. Ed has significant experience supporting large and small organizations set up and scale up in markets across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. For today's session, I'll provide some brief background on the FCRA to set the scene before turning it over to Naomi, who will lead us through the key amendments from the Act. Throughout the session, please do not hesitate to drop questions into the chat box. Ed will be monitoring the chat and leading the Q&A portion of today's program. So what is FCRA? I think many of the folks who have joined in have had some exposure to this act. For a little bit more background, former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi during the emergency introduced the draconian Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, FCRA, in 1976. That government, the UPA government, made it even more stringent and tougher in 2010, setting up renewal cycles and kind of overhauling it at that point. And now the current government led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi has further tightened whatever space there was left to operate under the FCRA. The FCRA itself is enforced by the Ministry of Home Affairs, and more specifically the intelligence wing within it, and has become highly opaque and arbitrary over the years. In the past, government has used FCRA to curb operations of prominent international organizations such as Greenpeace, Ford Foundation, on the basis that their activities are not in the public interest. For a little bit more kind of context, FCRA is kind of the route to market to bring funds from overseas into India. For those that are familiar with doing business in India, FEMA, a separate regulation, regulates FDI and FII, so investments going through kind of for-profit channels. It's worth kind of noting that, you know, in terms of the broader trends, and I've been looking at the broader trends with India for several years now, that ease of doing business has actually gotten much better since 2014 and under the current Prime Minister's leadership. In 2014, the World Bank ranked India 142 on its ease of doing business index, and India is all the way up to number 63 now, which you know, is very positive to see. Although, you know, if the World Bank created the same ease of doing business for nonprofits, I think you would see India moving in the opposite direction. In terms of just a little bit more information on some of the stats, on Ed, if you could go to the next slide. In terms of registrations, this information is based off of details available on the Government of India's website. Data of prior permissions, however, is not readily available, but our understanding is the number of prior permissions granted over the years has been steadily declining. As you can see, of the nearly total 50,000 registered entities, the majority are in 5 states. And since the Modi government has come into power in 2014, annual registrations have been 1/4 of what they were in 2011. I think this basic trend shows the government's kind of intent towards the sector to essentially limit the activity of nonprofit activity happening in India, or at least through these channels. You'll also notice a steep decline in 2020. This might be because of COVID, but it might also be just the kind of furthering the kind of trend of the slowdown of approvals for nonprofit organizations. So with that, I'll turn it over to Naomi, who will kind of go through some of the highlights in terms of the key amendments and what it means for international nonprofits looking to do further work in India. So Naomi, you're on mute.
Thanks, Michael. Ed, can you please? Thanks. Thanks, Michael. Good evening, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As part of a very productive monsoon session at the Parliament, the government passed the FCRA Amendment Bill, which has come into force on September 29th, 2020. The stated object of the Act is to strengthen compliance, apart from enhancing transparency and accountability of the foreign contribution that is received and utilized. However, the government is unclear on how the government plans to achieve this through this Act. One challenge which the government has stated in the past is non-filing of the annual returns and non-maintenance of proper accounts. None of these amendments seem to address that concern. In reality, if you look at it, it is already an over-regulated sector. Banks already have reporting requirements to follow. NGOs are already submitting quarterly intimations as well as annual filings. What is actually needed is a system to ensure nonprofits and banks comply with the set regulations rather than imposing stricter guidelines on them. While the Act came into effect on September 29th, the rules are yet to be released. Once the rules come out is when we'll get clarity on the bank account opening and the other requirements that have been there. Moving on, we will now explain the key amendments which are there under the Act. These amendments are particularly concerning given the situation that we are in because of COVID-19, and the impact particularly impacts how the non-profits are working towards a lot of projects which are actually benefiting and supporting the effects of COVID-19. Ed, can you please change the slide? Thanks. So the first amendment is that the Act, as of now, the Act prescribes that any FCRA registered entity in India, currently the Act prescribes that when you're applying for your registration or a prior permission, you give the details of the bank account in which you plan to receive the money. Now the Act has said that foreign contribution can only come into a specified branch of State Bank of India, which will be in New Delhi and notified by the government in due course. For those who do not know, SBI is India's largest bank in terms of market capitalization. It has over 22,414 branches. Here we understand the intent is to centralize inflow of foreign grants. SBI branch where the account needs to be opened should be notified in the rules. The information, we've tried reaching out to MHA to get clarity on this, and they've just told us to watch their website and they would be releasing the information soon. Government has also clarified that the non-profits do not need to travel to New Delhi. They can just go to the nearest SBI branch and get their account opened. This is a relief as 94% of the registered NGOs are actually outside Delhi. Though the primary FCRA account needs to be in SBI, NGOs will be allowed to freely transfer funds from this FCRA account to any other FCRA account that they have with any of the 61 approved banks. And the money can be transferred either for just keeping or for further utilization. As of now, it is unclear if non-profits who have their registrations and their prior permission applications pending, whether they also need to go in and apply for an account with SBI. We understand that other banks are taking their own call. Some banks are allowing the grants to come in, while some banks have put a stop to it. When a country is making tremendous strides in technology, it is a little bewildering why this regulation has come and why they want to centralize it, because all banks already are reporting whatever foreign contribution they receive to MHA. Ed, can you change the slide, please? The second key amendment is giving subgrants to other other FCRA registered non-profits in India. Earlier, FCRA registered non-profits could give subgrants to any other non-profit that had FCRA registration or had obtained a prior permission from the Ministry of Home Affairs. In fact, the Act also allowed non-profits to transfer up to 10% of the foreign grants to any unregistered non-profit in India, subject to a prior approval from Ministry of Home Affairs. This amendment has now imposed a blanket ban on transfer of foreign contribution to any other person in India. What this means is that if any non-profit gets any grant, it cannot subgrant any portion of this grant to any other FCRA registered non-profit in India. While the purpose seems to restrict large non-profits from acting as fundraisers and intermediaries for smaller NGOs, this amendment severely actually impacts these small non-profits as they don't have the wherewithal to actually access foreign grants directly. These grassroots NGOs play a crucial role in the entire non-profit ecosystem. They are far more familiar with the local context and administration and can actually effectively collaborate and execute these projects on behalf of the larger organizations. This amendment has come at a time where their support is crucial due to the continuing effects of the pandemic. This amendment could lead to a lot of non-profits actually downsizing or shutting down their operations altogether because they don't have funding to continue. This could severely impact all the education and healthcare related projects, which are heavily dependent on collaboration between large NGOs and frontline NGOs. Here, the donors will now need to consider either directly giving donations to the former subrecipients, which means additional administrative time and cost involvement, or they will have to cope with the greater transaction cost by actually engaging commercial vendors to support their projects. Also, it might just push smaller nonprofits to work in a for-profit model. So this is something which is very concerning and has actually put a lot of projects on hold right now. The third key amendment is the administrative expense cap. So earlier, Section 8 of the Act allowed nonprofits to spend up to 50% of the foreign grant that they receive in a financial year on administrative expenses. The definition of administrative expenses, which is there in the Act, includes the salaries, the travel expenses, remuneration which you pay to senior management, office rent, legal and professional fees, utility expenses, etc. This Amendment Act has now reduced this cap from 50% to 20%. While 20% is a fair cap for administrative expenses, the government has not taken into account spending pattern of think tanks, non-profits that provide financial and legal advice, research, advocacy, capacity building, and other such non-profits. Also, the amendment has not given any time to non-profits to actually go back to the drawing board to assess their projected expenditure. A 30% reduction is steep, and non-profits should have just been given some time to get their house in order. Ideally, the government should have considered implementing this change from the start of the next financial year, that is 1st April 2021. This ceiling will just make it harder for non-profits to invest in technology, training, and fundraising, which in a way weakens their long-term sustainability. Ed, can you please change the slide? Some of the other smaller, so these are the three key amendments which we've seen are alarming, and non-profits are sort of scrambling to figure a solution around them. Other smaller amendments which have come is, first one is that the Amendment Act has introduced a new section for 12A, which now says that when you're applying for a prior permission or registration or renewal under the Act, all Indian office bearers will have to provide the Aadhaar card number. Aadhaar card is a unique number which, based on biometric, is allotted to Indians now. But this is not applicable to foreigners. If there's a non-profit that has a foreigner on their board, the foreigner can submit their copy of passport, or if the person is an overseas citizen of India, they can submit their overseas citizen of India card. They do not require to go and obtain an Aadhaar. The next one is FCRA registration can be suspended for up to 360 days now. Earlier, the government could suspend the registration of a person for a period not exceeding 180 days. This meant that within a 180-day period, the government had to either cancel or reinstate the registration license. Now, the section has been amended, and now the registrations can be put under suspension for up to 360 days. The amendment will just provide a tool to the government to keep registration certifications under suspension for almost a year, even if they do not have any solid grounds for cancellation of the registration. Under the next one is restriction on receipt and utilization. This is a small sort of an amendment. Under the Act, if a person was accepting foreign contribution was found guilty, they could only receive the outstanding grant or utilize the amount with a prior permission, with a prior approval of the central government. Now, the bill has added that in case of prior permission application grants, if the government feels that these grants are not being spent like the way they would have stated in their applications, based on a summary inquiry, they can put a hold on it, which can be subject to a more detailed inquiry, but just based on a summary inquiry, they can put a stop on such NGOs, such non-profits receiving the balance payment or utilizing the money that they've already received. Ed, can you please change the slide? Now the Act also permits voluntary surrender of the FCRA registration certificate, which was earlier not possible. There was no given laid down process on how the surrender should happen. We should get more information on this once the rules come out. The next one is renewal of FCRA registration will have the same level of scrutiny. So under the Act, when an application is made, every person who is there has to go through a quite rigorous, there is a very rigorous verification process. Usually the renewal applications are to be filed 6 months before the expiry, and the government generally renews it within that period. Now they've specified that even for renewals, the same amount of scrutiny will be followed. The last amendment which has been proposed is adding public servant to the list of people who cannot accept foreign grants. So earlier, the restriction was only on judges, government servants, and employees of any corporation or body or any body which is controlled or owned by the government. The definition of public servant under the Indian Penal Code is quite wide, and it includes government employees, officers of armed forces, police, judges, officers of court of justice, and local authorities established by the central or state government. This change is meant to curb influence of foreign donors on government officials who are in a position of shaping policy. These are the key amendments which have been put into effect. Ed, can you please change the slide? Here are some of the news clippings that show the reaction of the non-profit sector to the amendments. The timing of the FCRA bill is the most bewildering, as it was tabled in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic where the civil society role is crucial. We are waiting for the government to release the rules, which will give us more clarity on the amendments, particularly on how the surrender process and how to open the bank account. In our view, the government is unlikely to retract these changes, and non-profits will have to work we will have to now figure how they can work around these new set of provisions. Ed, can you please change the slide? So here are a few questions that non-profits and donors need to start asking themselves. The first one is, what is your current admin expense percentage? You may need to trim your overhead expenses. Given that some non-profits may see further reduction in grants due to the grant money flowing towards certain other pressing areas because of the pandemic, it is important to have a plan in place, especially for year 21-22. The next one is, if non-profits are collaborating with any other non-profits in India, how they can continue executing these projects. Maybe the solution, the short-term solution is to engage a commercial vendor or to send money directly from the foreign source to these smaller NGOs. But these models might not be sustainable in the long run, and NGOs, a lot of non-profits might have to actually consider setting up a for-profit entity in India. The fourth one is the banking structure. Although opening an account with State Bank of India cannot be ignored now, but you may decide to continue using your current banking partners and just use the SBI account to bring money in, and then just funnel it into how many ever accounts you have to execute projects in India. When you're up for renewal, it would be better to get a quick verification of everyone who's on your board as well as senior management done yourself before you apply to Ministry of Home Affairs to get the registration renewed. This would just put you at ease that there is no sort of thing, or there's no area, or there's no question which MHA can raise on any of the people who are in the management role at the NGO. Ed, can you please change the slide? Thank you everyone for your time, and I hope I was able to explain the amendments clearly to you. And now the floor is open to questions.
Great, thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Michael. And if you've seen me looking down a lot, it's because we've been getting a lot of questions. So I'm now going to help navigate us through those questions. So firstly, thanks to all of you that have asked the questions. And if I'm looking down, that's because I've got a few different devices with the questions coming in on. So let's start then with a question from Neha. which is probably for you, Naomi. Does a private limited company need to apply for FCRA for money it is receiving for work it will do with monies in the social and charitable sector?
So here it would depend on what the actual objects of the for-profit company is, and what exactly it is doing. If the funding, if it's a for-profit entity, then it is offering its income to tax. And if it is offering its income to tax and it is doing work in the form of a commercial activity, then an FCRA registration or approval is not required. There are enough for-profit entities which are actually engaged in research activity, or they're engaged in delivering projects in which might just be in healthcare sector. All those non-profits all those for-profit entities do not need to go in for an FCRA registration. In any case, the definition of foreign contribution under the Act explicitly excludes commercial fee. So if an entity or even a non-profit is getting commercial fee, that does not fall under foreign contribution and hence is outside the ambit of FCRA.
Very good, thank you.
Just a quick follow on that though, is FEMA would apply, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you'd fall into just an entirely different regulatory regime.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Michael. And under FEMA, such current account transactions are freely permitted. So there is no issue there.
Very good. Okay. So there's obviously much anticipation about the release of the rules. Is there any timeline for that? So
back in 2010, when the Act was overhauled, the rules came out in 2011. So there was a significant gap. Our take is that it will not take that long. We have already written to MHA on their common help desk ID, and we've tried calling them up. They've just asked us to hold and just keep watching their website for more update. But they've not released any timeline. It's very difficult to guess what it will be. But my take is that it should come out pretty soon. Let's wait and watch.
Okay, good. Okay, next question so thanks to Irene for that question. Next question from Shirley. What about current multi-year grants that rely on subgranting? And a sort of secondary question, should they stop subgranting?
So yes, they should stop subgranting. The Act, it's come into effect on 29th September. It does not talk about that if you had already signed an agreement before, you are allowed. There's no relaxation given there. And given that FCRA is a draconian law, yes, you should stop subgranting immediately. You will need to rework the agreements and rework the contract and the way you are delivering these projects in India.
Okay, that's all clear. And then we've had a couple of different iterations of the same question, which is whether the 20% limit is on each grant received or on the overall foreign funds received in the year. So
here, different advisors will give you a different answer. One take is that a lot of the generally accepted norm is that the 20% or the 50% earlier was on the aggregate foreign grants which you receive in the year. But when we read the definition, it clearly says such a foreign grant, the maximum should be 50%. So if you just read the law in the way it is written, it can be said that it is 20% per grant. My advice would be to limit it to 20% per grant, so that you comply with both 20% of the entire financial year as well as 20% of per grant which you received in that year.
Okay, and then sticking with the 20%, I'm just going to jump around questions. So question from Shashank. So the biggest practical concern seems to be with the 50% admin expense cap reduced to 20%. how can salaries of shared services like HR, admin and finance and senior management be covered under 20%?
So, great question. There's no simple answer to it. You should definitely not look at sort of bucketing these costs that, okay, 50% of the HR cost is direct towards management of the the project implementation staff. So let me put it in project costs. The auditors will not accept it and they can't qualify your report. There is no ready solution to it. Each non-profit will have to look at what exactly is the nature and how they can reduce it and how they can play around with the numbers. I'm sorry, but there's no simple solution which I can offer here.
Okay.
But you can't now allocate senior management costs to profit, like project related cost, and not term it as admin. It will continue to be treated as an administrative cost only.
Well, and I just jumping in here, I mean, I think that's really the intention of this act, is to make operating a nonprofit in India extremely difficult.
Yeah, the thing is to basically keep the overheads, the overhead cost lean. So NGOs will just will have to figure a way out how they can reduce their overall their overhead cost here.
I think Ed, back over to you, but I have been seeing kind of a number of questions about private limited. I think there has been a trend of nonprofits moving more towards a kind of for-profit structure in order to, kind of relax some of these requirements. But Ed, I know you're man. I know there's so many questions coming in, so.
We will pick up on that in a second. So I'm going to go to a slightly different area because we've had a few questions about related to the public servant question. So here's one from Shirley. Can you confirm the ban on receipt by public servants means any NGO with a public servant on the board or staff is not eligible for the receipts of foreign funds?
So I'm not sure whether you're talking about ex-public servant or current public servant. My understanding is you might be talking about former public servants. So that's fine. But if there's an existing public servant on the board of your nonprofits, then knowing how FCRA is interpreted, that's definitely a problem. You should definitely do the required changes in your board.
Okay, thank you for that. So on to the bank accounts. So will the receipt of foreign funds need to have separate accounts for each funding source? Or can a single SBI account be used for all?
A single SBI account. So how it will work is there will need to be a single SBI account. You will have the option of creating sub-accounts, like the way you have option of creating sub-accounts with your current bankers. And from those sub-accounts, you can transfer money to other banks or directly utilize it or directly utilize the money from your main SBI account. All the flexibility should be offered.
Okay, good. Thank you, Naomi. So the next one is back to the admin expenses. So could you please categorize the list of non-admin expenses and the best ways to spend this 80% capital? Sorry, the non-admin cost categories, which I imagine will be specific to each case, but maybe you could just give an overview.
So the administrative expenses is very clearly defined under the Act. So you'll have to go through the definition and then see what all is there. I can read the entire definition out to you, but it's more or less you'll have to look at the definition and then see what expense falls under what head. So
just a quick,
yeah.
Go ahead, Naomi.
So
go ahead.
So whether it's your utility expenses or your legal and professional charges or the salary or the travel cost of not only the executive committee, but the entire senior management that is looking at supervising various projects, all that cost has to go into administrative expenses because the definition clearly says that.
And recategorizing, I think the second part of that question is, and this has come up with some of our conversations with some of our partners, is what about recategorizing some of those expenses? Is there any way to shift them around?
That's a more detailed exercise which you'll have to undertake just to meet the 20% cap. If you go and just change your accounting policy and you start moving expenses which are actually in the nature of administrative, the auditors are definitely going to qualify the financial statements, and since they have to audit the separate the financial statements which are prepared for the foreign grants, they will definitely qualify it and it's going to be highlighted. So that might not be the right move to go about. This requires you to basically sit down with the accounting team and see each and every expenditure and think maybe there were certain expenses which are clearly in the nature of project costs and there should not be any questions. Those you can definitely move.
Okay. So let's just focus on one of those types of cost. We've had a few questions relating to, I guess, the use of consultants. So here's one from Nalini. If a US-based NGO is hiring consultants in India to do development work, will this FCRA amendment eventually evolve to restrictions on that as well?
No, because the definition of foreign contribution, so FCRA looks at just regulating foreign contributions that come into India. Foreign contributions, explicitly the definition under the Act says that commercial fees is not covered under this definition. So in our view, it will not impact that in the future as well. The issue will come if you're trying to give commercial fee to non-profits in India, because non-profits in India are registered under the Income Tax Act, they have tax exemption. And most of the non-profits will be registered under the general clause, which has a condition that if you are receiving more than 20% of your total receipts in the year are commercial income, then your tax exemption for that year is not applicable. So that sort of puts a lot of non-profits into a sort of a tizzy, and they don't want to do that. And then there's always an exposure that if they are receiving commercial income apart from getting grants, at any given point of time, the tax officer can call them for a tax audit and say that, hey, you're doing the same kind of work under a for-profit model and under a not-for-profit model, then basically you don't really need the tax exemption. And then there's a whole new issue under GST, because the definition of charitable activities under GST is very limited. So during the GST audit, the question can come up that when you are you're taking commercial fees and you're saying that this is subject to GST, but why not the grants? Because the activity which you're doing under both of them is the same. So that's why you'll find a lot of non-profits will not be willing to take commercial fees.
So a question from Jeff. I understand that we cannot make subgrants to other FCRA holders. Can we make subgrants to persons or NGOs in India that do not hold an FCRA? No,
you cannot make subgrants to any NGO that does not have FCRA. Earlier, there was a clause which said that up to 10% an Indian FCRA registered NGO could transfer to an unregistered NGO subject to a prior government approval, but that's also been done away with.
Okay, great. And then a question from Austin. Will the new rules apply in the same way to funds received under prior approval, i.e. admin cap, subgrant restrictions, etc.? And then there's a second question, which I'll pick up after that.
Yes, it will apply to the foreign grants that you receive under the prior permission as well. It doesn't matter whether it's under the registration or it's under prior permission. Both of them, you will not be able to subgrant it.
Okay, great. And then the secondary question was, will the admin cap also apply to domestically funded costs?
Domestically, so you mean local grants? No. This 50% cap, this 20% cap is only for foreign grants. if you're, let's say you're getting CSR money in India, or you're getting money from a philanthropist in India, then the administrative cap of 20% will not apply.
Okay, and then a question from Nelly. If we send funds to one FCRA registered NGO who then pays salaries and pays invoices on behalf of a non-FCRA registered NGO without transferring the funds to the non-registered NGO, A, is this allowed under the law? And B, is this classed as subgranting? And if you want me to read the question again.
I'm sorry, the question was not clear, because you can't transfer. The first thing you said is that if we transfer money to an FCRA registered NGO, do you mean from US or from a foreign organization you want to pay salaries of Indian employees? Is that the question?
Yeah, let me read it again. If we send funds to one FCRA registered NGO who then pays salaries and pays invoices on behalf of a non-FCRA registered NGO without transferring the funds to the non-registered NGO, is this allowed under the new law? So I assume it means paying expenses directly.
We would not suggest you to do that, especially do not pay salaries, because you will open like a tax presence issue in India. So don't do it.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on the chat. Ken's follow-up question in terms of paying consultants. Naomi, you said that there should be no issue in doing that, but can consultants hold management responsibilities over staff as categorized as programmatic expenses? So I think you're going to get to the same answer that you just gave.
Yeah, so it's not something which you should just go ahead and do it. This requires a bit more detailed analysis, because if not analyzed properly, you might just land up creating a tax presence in India, and the Indian revenue authorities might actually come after you and say that you owe us 40% of the income which should have been attributed to the India operation. So this requires a detailed analysis. Don't go ahead and do it.
So it's a permanent establishment risk.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and Naomi, I guess I have a slightly more macro question around the direction of travel here for the Indian government. As we understand, the level of consultation that was done ahead of this change was relatively limited. Do you expect the government to change its position on this topic, or is this something that we and our guests today need to learn to live with?
So I have not seen government take back any of the new amendments that they've made. Everybody has made a lot of hue and cry, but they've stuck their ground. So I think we need to live with it and work around it. I don't see the government taking it back.
Okay, good. And a question from Bistra then. What would be your recommendation about non-profits who are not registered domestically but hire a consultant in the country? Would they be affected?
You mean, sorry, Ed, I didn't get the question.
So the question, what would be your recommendation about non-profits who are not registered domestically but hire a consultant in the country? Would they be affected?
But you mean that you hire these non-profits who are not registered under FCRA as consultants. So as I mentioned, the non-profits might have a problem being hired as a consultant because they will lose their tax exemption status under income tax. If the non-profits does not have a problem losing their tax exemption status under income tax, then you can go ahead and hire them as consultants. Not an issue.
Okay, and I think if you're an overseas non-profit and you're only using consultants locally, there are some other issues that raises in relation to permanent establishment potentially. So
yes.
And then a question from Adriana. Under the new rules, how long is it expected the approval process for a new entity will take? It was already a long process, and these changes seem only to be extending the process?
So yes, the process is fairly long and very unclear. And in fact, these amendments have now thrown more questions that what about the non-profits that had already applied? Do they need to go and apply for an SBI account? What if for a prior permission, the project details that they had submitted included subgrants? Does it mean they automatically rejected? There is no clarity on it yet, and I doubt there's going to be any clarity, hopefully, but I doubt it. So I don't see the period reducing given the COVID-19 related lockdowns and just general working at a lower capacity. The timeline is definitely going to be longer. Nothing which you can do about it.
Okay, that's good. And then a question from Neha, which is not specifically on FCRA, but related. So would individual consultants hired by a foreign body be required to pay GST?
So GST depends on what's the nature of service which is being provided. If the nature of service falls can be treated as an export of service, then no. But if it is sort of an intermediary activity or does not fall under export of services, then GST would apply. And obviously it depends on what the total amount that you're hiring the Indian individual consultants for. But then again, it needs to be assessed what is the scope for which you're hiring individual consultants, because you do not want to set up a tax presence in India, which would have other implications.
Okay, and then I think building off the question that I asked a little while ago, a question from Austin, considering the government's broader objectives of this amendment, do you anticipate future attention or additional restrictions coming in the future for the NGO community operating through private limited companies as well? So
I'm sure you might have read about the Amnesty International fiasco that's going on, but we don't see that as an issue because there are enough non-profits that are operating under a for-profit model, and they have been successfully doing it, and they have been filing returns, whether it's with GST or whether it's with the income tax under the income tax law. And we are also aware of foreign organizations that managed to get a for-profit as well as a not-for-profit structure in India. So the information was given to Ministry of Home Affairs regarding other presence in India, and they have not come up and said or raised a question around it. Also, because the current act explicitly excludes commercial fee from the definition of foreign contribution, we don't see any non-compliance or which such organizations are doing. Further, whether it's the Companies Act or FCRA, it doesn't. In a for-profit structure, which is basically foreign investment that comes into India, is managed under FEMA. FEMA doesn't discriminate if your shareholder is a for-profit organization or a not-for-profit organization. It doesn't matter who the shareholder or who the actual organization is, which is sending the capital in. So if it's capital which is coming in a for-profit structure under FEMA, it doesn't matter if it's coming from a not-for-profit entity.
Yeah, it seems to me it'd be quite difficult for the government to kind of contort the Companies Act somehow. I guess they'd have to, I don't even know how that would work.
Yeah, and more or less, not even the Companies Act. It's actually it's the Foreign Exchange Management Act that controls the FDI that comes in. They've never raised a question that we cannot accept foreign capital or commercial fee that's coming in from a non-profit outside India. That's never been a question till now.
Okay. So I think I may not have covered every single question, but I think we've covered the major themes of the question. Clearly, the audience will all have their own individual circumstances to think through. it sounds like quick action is required. And maybe, Naomi, you could just make a comment on, I guess, the level of activity that we're seeing at the moment, and whether people are kind of in a wait and watch mode, or whether people have moved to action already.
Yes, so nobody's in a wait and watch mode now. Everybody is sort of figuring out what needs to be done here. So everyone was hoping that there would be some gap between the bill getting passed and the act actually getting notified, but there wasn't. It just happened pretty quickly. So in fact, we've seen a lot of nonprofits actually going ahead and giving notices of termination to their sub-recipients, and looking at commercial vendors so that they can continue doing the projects, telling their foreign grants, if they were getting foreign, sub-grants into their account, they've decided to put a hold on it. So there is no wait and watch happening here. All nonprofits are taking it very seriously, because especially the NGOs that are FCRA registered, they know that slightest non-compliance can just lead to the Ministry of Home Affairs cancelling their license. So everyone's just ensuring that they've started following the law.
Okay, great. I should have just picked up one other question. We've got a couple of minutes. So what's the process for opening the bank account with SBI? How much do we know about that? And do you see any challenges in transferring funds from the SBI account to other accounts?
So the State Bank of India has not released any process. You can always write to State Bank of India to give the documentation that is required to open a account with them, that they are sharing. It's a standard process which all banks need to do. But which branch the State Bank of India needs to open the account in, they have not. They don't know. We know this. It's going to be in Central Delhi, but it is yet to be confirmed. And we don't see any challenge in transfer of funds from the SBI account to other accounts. SBI, like any other bank, has a good system in place, and they have a good net banking platform, and we don't see a challenge there. It should be fairly easy and routine.
I just had a quick one, and I'm not sure if we covered it specifically, so sorry if we have, but from Tamar, are there restrictions on private limited companies locally registered in India giving to local NGOs? So I think we covered kind of from overseas into private limiteds. We covered that already, but once the private limiteds are established, is there any kind of restrictions in giving essentially subgranting or subcontracting, or what does that look like, Naomi?
So you mean from a non-profit you give to a for-profit in India?
From a for-profit in India giving to a non-profit in India.
A for-profit giving to a non-profit in India, so you get only up to a maximum of 50% deduction under tax. So till the time you're following that, and if CSR regulations are applicable to you, there is not an issue.
Okay, one related question, I guess, in terms of different types of legal entities. We've just had a question from Vitra. So are liaison offices or branch offices covered under the new FCRA bill?
So back in Feb 2019 or 2018, the FEMA sort of changed, the RBI regulations changed, and said that if a non-profit organization is looking at setting up a liaison office or branch office in India to carry out charitable activities, then you don't need to come to RBI for an approval. You need to go to the Ministry of Home Affairs to get an approval under FCRA. Though this change was made under RBI regulations, and the Ministry of Home Affairs didn't release any form. So when you apply for a prior permission or you apply for a registration, there's an online form which you need to fill. And the online form sort of includes information as your date of incorporation in India and details of the FCRA blocked account. Now, unless and until you already have a liaison office in India, there's no way that you can get a bank account number here. So there is sort of a gap in whether a non-profit can actually go and set up a liaison office to set up to do charitable activities, or it's just sort of now has gone into a limbo stage that RBI has said that we will not give you an approval, and MHA has not released any process. But one thing which can be done here is that if a not-for-profit organization wants to set up a liaison office or a branch office in India, which is not specifically to carry out any charitable activity. Let's say you want to set up a liaison office in India just to have like one rep in India. So those applications can definitely be filed with the Reserve Bank of India. Whether the Reserve Bank of India will actually process it or whether the bank will actually forward it is a question right now. We've not seen the Reserve Bank of India process any application till date.
Okay, great. So I'm going to ask you one final question and then just briefly wrap up. So this is from Craig, are salaries of staff involved in the direct delivery of a project, e.g. teacher delivering a workshop or class, or a vet providing treatment for animals, defined as non-administrative?
So there's no definition of non-administrative, but the nature of such cost is definitely project cost and is not administrative. So putting it.
Okay, I think that's clear. So a number of you have asked in the chat whether slides will be provided off the back of today, which we will do, and we will try and build in, I guess, responses to the themes of the questions that are being asked. As you go forwards with your own individual agendas, I'll just put up the contact details of the team. If you've got any specific questions, please do reach out to us, because we appreciate everybody operates in a slightly different way. But I'd just like to, I guess, wrap up probably with the summary that we recognise this is probably an unwelcome change for many, but it feels like we need to learn to operate in the environment within which these changes have been codified and find explore new ways of working to allow you to achieve the various objectives that you're trying to achieve at a time where likely those objectives are most at need. So thank you to all of you for joining. Thank you in particular to Naomi and to Michael. I'm not sure we've had a webinar with so many questions for a little while, which would suggest that that there's a sort of pent-up demand for information here. So thanks to all of you, and wishing you a good day, good evening, wherever you are in the world. All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.